Every commentator who covered that night called the interview controlled. You watched the same footage and saw something completely different. Colbert had already destroyed the credibility of Trump's key witness 6 days before this taping. The cameras caught it. The clip ran on 4 networks. By the time Trump walked onto that stage, the story in every press briefing room and every cable green room was that the witness was finished, discredited, dismissed, done. What nobody had told Trump was that the witness was already in the building. The segment begins in the middle of its own momentum. 44 minutes into the taping, the LED display behind Colbert's desk shows a timeline that Trump has been talking over for 90 seconds. His voice is rising. His left hand is flat on the armrest but pressing down with a steadiness that is not calm, the way a man grips a railing not because he needs to, but because letting go would require admitting that he does. The camera on his position catches a sheen at the hairline that was not there when the segment began, and Colbert is saying something. Low, measured, unhurried, and the something he is saying contains a name. To understand how this moment arrived, you have to go back to 6 days prior. The original discrediting had been surgical. Trump's team had released a statement identifying the witness, a former senior communications aide named Elena Marsh, as having filed a grievance against a previous employer in 2019, the implication being that her pattern was complaint, not credibility. The statement was 12 sentences long. It named her 3 times. It used the word disgruntled twice and the word fabricated once. It was posted at 11:14 p.m. on a Thursday, which is the hour chosen when the goal is to shape the morning cycle without having to answer questions about it in real time. By Friday morning, 3 cable networks had run the statement. By Friday afternoon, 2 of them had added the word alleged to their chyrons. By Saturday, the 3rd had quietly revised its segment framing. The statement had done what statements do when deployed at 11 p.m. It had introduced doubt, not proof, doubt. And in the news cycle, doubt is frequently sufficient. Colbert had booked Marsh for the following Tuesday. The decision was made without public announcement. No press release, no social media preview. The booking was confirmed Thursday evening, 22 hours before Trump's statement dropped. Whether the sequence was coincidence or choreography is a question that the production office has declined to answer directly. What is documented is the timeline. Trump's team learned of the booking on Monday afternoon. The Truth Social posts began at 6:47 p.m. By 9 p.m. there were 4 of them. By midnight there were 7. The capital letters appeared in the 3rd post. The phrase "total witch hunt" appeared in the 4th. The phrase "Colbert is finished" appeared in the 6th post, which also contained a specific demand addressed to CBS's standards department by name. The 7th post, filed at 12:03 a.m., was the longest, 341 words, the last 40 of which were a single run-on sentence that auto-corrected itself into partial incoherence on 2 separate platforms. That is the context in which Trump walked into Studio 6A on Tuesday evening. His first line was delivered before he fully reached the guest chair, while still in motion, while the audience applause was still falling, while the lighting director was completing the key adjustment for the guest position. He said, "I'll just say this up front, Stephen. You have a real problem, and I think you know what it is, and I think the people watching at home are going to see exactly what that problem is tonight." He said it at moderate volume and at moderate pace, but there was a precision in the delivery that suggested it had been rehearsed, or at minimum considered, more than once. He settled into the chair with his right ankle crossing his left knee. He looked at Colbert in a way that was not quite a smile and was not quite a warning, but occupied the exact territorial midpoint between them. Colbert said, "Welcome back." That was all. 2 words. He held the eye contact and held it, and the audience read the stillness correctly, even if they couldn't have explained what they were reading. Trump launched into the barrage quickly, more quickly than was customary, with less atmospheric padding than his standard opening posture. The ratings attack arrived first. The show's numbers, the demographic erosion, the specific comparison to a competitor's Tuesday slot performance that Trump cited with a precision that implied recent research. He moved to the relevance attack without a transitional pause, saying that the kind of television Colbert produced had the cultural half-life of a campaign ad, engineered for a specific news cycle, obsolete 24 hours later. He said the program had become a delivery mechanism for a worldview that 40% of Americans found actively offensive, and that CBS's continued willingness to fund it was a corporate decision that the network's shareholders deserved to understand better than they currently did. The personal attack was more calibrated than usual. He said Colbert was a genuinely talented man who had made a specific choice, the choice to trade depth for volume, to be loudly wrong rather than quietly right. and that the choice had been commercially rewarding and creatively terminal simultaneously. He called it a bargain that most comedians made at some point, and said the tragedy of it was that Colbert had made it earlier than most, and therefore had further to fall. The power claim arrived on schedule. He said the rooms that determined outcomes, not the rooms that reported on outcomes, but the rooms that produced them, had no seat for Colbert and never would. He said influence and performance were not the same category of activity, that conflating them was the specific mistake that journalists and entertainers made when they began to believe that the size of their audience was equivalent to the weight of their authority. Colbert sat without moving through all of it. A woman in the fifth row had stopped blinking. The floor director's headset was half an inch lower on his ear than it had been 3 minutes earlier. Trump concluded with a dismissal that was almost cordial. "I don't have any hard feelings. I just want people to see the show for what it is. And I think they will. I think tonight especially, they will." The silence after that sentence was the longest of the segment so far. 5 seconds, measured later against the broadcast clock. Then Colbert uncapped a pen. Not a dramatic gesture, not a slow reach for a folder, just a pen uncapped on a notepad, and when he spoke, his voice was lower than it had been during the introduction, lower than it was during the warm-up, a voice operating in a register that carried weight by reduction rather than addition. "Everything you just said was designed to fill the room with noise," he said, "but facts don't care about volume." He turned the notepad toward Trump. On it, in printed text prepared before the taping, was a single name. Elena Marsh. Trump's jaw set. It was visible. The masseter muscle contracting slightly, the line of the jaw going from soft to defined, in the way that happens when a person processes something they were expecting and had decided not to show that they were expecting. "She's been discredited," Trump said. His voice was level, but the levelness had effort in it. "By your team," Colbert said. "Let's look at how." The monitor activated. What appeared on screen was not a timeline or a document package. It was a side-by-side display. On the left, the original discrediting statement issued by Trump's communications office on Thursday night. On the right, a paragraph from Elena Marsh's employment record at the organization where the 2019 grievance had allegedly been filed. The paragraph showed the outcome of the grievance. The outcome was that the grievance had been ruled in her favor. The original statement had not included the outcome. It had named the grievance and stopped there. Colbert read the right side paragraph aloud. He did not editorialize. He read it flat and complete, including the date of the ruling, including the name of the adjudicating office, including the finding language, which used the word substantiated. Trump said it was irrelevant. Colbert said, "You built an infrastructure around her credibility. Tonight we're looking at what the infrastructure is actually made of." He pressed the second button. The folder came out next, unhurriedly, placed on the desk with the same flat deliberateness that the room had already come to recognize as the precursor to something that would not be easily dismissed. Inside it were 3 pages. The first was a communications log from within Trump's organization, an internal routing document showing that the decision to release the discrediting statement had been made not by the communications office as attributed, but by a team 2 organizational layers closer to Trump's direct circle. The routing log showed 4 names. Trump's communications director was not among them. The chain of custody for the decision ran upward, not laterally. Trump said the document was unverifiable. Colbert said he had submitted it for forensic review on Friday and set the verification report beside the folder. The report was 2 pages. He did not read it aloud. He turned it toward the camera. A man in the second row leaned forward until his elbows touched his knees. The timeline appeared on the LED screen. It showed the 48 hours between Colbert's booking of Marsh on Thursday and Trump's statement at 11:14 p.m. the same night. 3 data points connected by a horizontal line. Booking confirmed, 6:22 p.m. Thursday. Statement drafted, 8:47 p.m. Thursday. Time extracted from document metadata shown in a secondary inset window on the right side of the screen. Statement posted, 11:14 p.m. Thursday. The gap between the booking confirmation and the drafting of the statement was 2 hours and 25 minutes. Trump said the timeline proved nothing. His voice had risen a half register. The crossing ankle had uncrossed. Colbert said, "The timeline doesn't make a claim. It just shows you when things happened." Then the audio played. It was brief, 18 seconds, extracted from a recording made during a strategy session 2 weeks prior. The voice was identifiable. The instruction in the voice was specific. Find something on the aid before the show. Find it fast, and make sure it runs before the booking is public. Colbert showed the forensic verification on a secondary display. The same 4-page spectral analysis format, chain of custody intact. Trump said it was edited. The verification remained on screen. The studio went quiet in the particular way that studios go quiet when an audience has run out of reactive responses and is now simply processing. Then the stage left door opened. Elena Marsh walked onto the stage in a dark blazer and slacks, carrying nothing. She was 41 years old, according to Colbert's introduction, and had worked as a senior communications aide for 7 years across 2 organizations, one of which had been directly connected to Trump's operation for 3 of those years. She stood at the lectern position to Colbert's left with both hands resting on the surface, and her posture had the quality of someone who has decided, specifically and irrevocably, not to be small. Her testimony was procedural and precise. She described her role. She described the categories of communication she had handled. She described a specific directive she had received in the spring of the year she left, which involved routing certain categories of documentation through a secondary channel that was not subject to the same record retention protocols as the primary channel. She said she had followed the directive for 11 weeks. She said she had stopped following it when she understood what the secondary channel was being used to avoid. She said she had kept copies. Trump's voice came up before she finished the last sentence. He called her a disgruntled former employee, pursuing a financial agenda. He said the grievance she had filed in 2019 demonstrated a documented pattern of using institutional channels for personal benefit. He said her sudden appearance on this stage was the predictable endpoint of a sequence that began with resentment and ended with a television booking. Marsh did not raise her voice. Her throat worked once, a small visible contraction, before she responded. I rehearsed this moment 11 times in the parking structure across the street, she said. Her voice was steady. And every time, I started by saying something complicated, but the truth is simple. I left because the secondary channel contained communications that I did not believe any functioning institution should be generating, and I am here because I was more afraid of what it meant if I never spoke than I was of anything that could happen to me for speaking. She looked at Trump directly for the first time. I'm not betraying the family, she said. I'm betraying a lie. The room did not respond immediately. A woman in the 4th row pressed her fingers against her closed eyelids. A man near the aisle dropped his chin toward his chest. Then, from somewhere in the middle section, someone stood. The clapping that followed was not wild. It was slow and building and real, hands coming together with the specific weight of people who have decided that applause is the only accurate response left. It spread in uneven waves across the studio. Not uniform, not orchestrated, but genuine, in the way that only uncoordinated things can be genuine. Trump was standing. He was not standing to applaud. He was standing because the chair had become an incorrect position for whatever he was attempting to manage in his body. His chest was moving visibly, the breathing no longer contained or controlled. His hands were at his sides, and then not at his sides, one finding the edge of the desk, the other moving to his lapel, and then away. His eyes moved between Marsh and the monitor, and the document still on the desk and the screen still showing the timeline, and none of these destinations offered resolution. This is a setup, he said. The voice was louder than the room required, and slightly higher than his natural register. This was planned from the beginning. The document, the recording, the timeline, all of it was built to get to this moment. You planned it. Colbert looked at him. He was the only person in the room who appeared to be operating at a normal metabolic rate. The documents are on the table, he said. The timeline is on the screen. The witnesses spoke. Your move. Trump's mouth opened. A production camera held on his face in a close-up that the network did not cut away from. For 4 seconds, the frame held the open mouth and the stillness behind it. The stillness of a man who arrived at the top of an argument and discovered that the argument had no floor. His jaw closed. What happened in the building in the following 3 hours was documented by 6 separate people who were present and willing to speak about it afterward. Trump moved through the backstage corridor at a speed that his security detail later described as non-standard. His communications director received a call before the stage door closed behind him. The call lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds, after which the communications director immediately called 2 journalists, both of whom declined to publish what they were offered. Trump's aide, attempting to type a preliminary response on his phone, produced 4 consecutive auto-corrected messages that were forwarded internally as accidental documentation of the moment's atmosphere. The clips hit the platforms before the taping concluded. By 11 p.m., the segment had been divided into 14 independent pieces. The most shared single moment was Marsh's final line. 7 seconds, looping without caption on 4 platforms simultaneously. Within 6 hours, the clip had been viewed 19 million times across all segments combined. The phrase, "I'm betraying a lie," was searched more times in a single night than it had been in the entire prior history of the phrase's existence in any context. At 2:47 a.m., a verified news network received an anonymous communication on network letterhead from a medical professional connected to the secondary channel documentation. The communication was short, a single paragraph on matching institutional stationery, confirming the existence of 2 appointments that corresponded to dates in the routing log, stating that the records had been maintained under a secondary patient identifier, and closing with a sentence that the network's overnight editor read 3 times before forwarding to the senior correspondent on duty, that continuing to maintain silence about this information was no longer consistent with the professional obligations under which the communication was being written. The network verified the letterhead against public records within 40 minutes. No proof of fabrication, no way to dismiss it quickly. The verification was circulated internally at 3:31 a.m. Trump posted 9 times between midnight and 4 a.m. Each post was longer than the one before it. By the 4th post, the capital letters had reached critical mass. By the 7th, the syntax had begun to fracture. Sentences starting without subjects, clauses appearing without the propositions that should have preceded them, punctuation deployed at irregular intervals that suggested composition at a velocity the language could not quite sustain. Each post was screenshotted and placed beside the clip in which Marsh said, "I'm betraying a lie," and the comparison did not require commentary. The news cycle did not move on. It settled. Anchors replayed the moment Colbert said infrastructure. The first time, when he laid the word against the discrediting statement, and the second time, when he said it quietly in the collapsing final minutes, and let it sit in the middle of segments without surrounding it with interpretation, because the word had been chosen precisely and landed precisely, and did not require additional weight to do its work. What the public discussed was not the documents. What the public discussed was the 4 seconds of open mouth and the absence of what should have filled it. Forums cataloged the routing log against prior communications. Cross-references appeared between the secondary channel timeline and public record gaps that had previously been individually explained, and were now, in aggregate, something more structurally coherent than explanation could comfortably contain. Months later, the official counter-documentation had not arrived. The secondary channel had not been publicly addressed. The routing log remained on Colbert's desk in the photograph that had been reproduced in 14 separate news contexts and counting. The infrastructure was visible now. What it had been built to conceal remained the question that the silence would not answer. The people who subscribe to this channel don't come for drama. They come for the moments nobody else is willing to show. Join them, subscribe, turn on notifications. The next truth is already on the table.